Show! The Bluegrass Institute for Public Policy Solutions was founded in Bowling Green, Kentucky. The purpose is to move Kentucky from a state of government dependency to one of opportunity and prosperity for individual Kentuckians by offering free market solutions to the Commonwealth's greatest challenges. The Bluegrass Institute is Kentucky's first and only free market think tank and is an affiliate of the State Policy Network. Richard Ennis brings a uniquely independent viewpoint to public education research, approaching those studies from a parent-oriented perspective. Ennis has been investigating Kentucky education since 1994. In 1999, his research highlighted significant problems with exclusion of learning disabled students from the National Assessment of Education Progress. Cautions about those problems now are found in recent reports from the testing program, while research continues on ways to correct these issues and improve the accuracy of the data. So I was reading through some of your documents and kind of touch on where we rank nationwide, like Kentucky. How do we rank right now in education?
That's a great question. And there's more misconception about this, I think, than in almost any other area involving Kentucky's public education system. I've heard numerous times from numerous sources who should be well informed, including legislators and people from even the University of Kentucky's School of Education, say that back when the Kentucky Education Reform Act of 1990 was passed, Kentucky used to rank at the bottom of all the states for its public education performance. But now, currently, we have risen a lot, and we are now ranking in the middle of the pack. Well, I've got to tell you that this idea that we rank in the middle of the pack is actually a misinformed notion, and it's based on improper analysis of data from things like the National Assessment of Educational Progress, which is a federal testing program. Recently, it's been given every other year in both reading and math to both 4th and 8th grade students in Kentucky and in the other states. And it allows us to have a fair comparison for a test that's given uniformly across all 50 states to see how we're doing for real. The kicker is that Kentucky's student population is not like many other states in the nation. In Kentucky, as of 2019, we were still 75% white in our public school system. The United States average had dropped by 2019 to below 50% white. And what the people who were telling you we rank at the middle were really doing is they were comparing a lot of scores for our white students to scores for kids of color in other states, because they were only looking at the overall average scores. So they were taking high percentages of our kids who were white and comparing their results to kids of color. And because of the achievement gaps, that's misleading. And NAEP documentation started to get concerned about this improper state-to-state comparison as early as 2005. In 2009, they actually had a special section in the NAEP 2009 science report card that went into more details. And among those things, they talked about how the picture can change very dramatically when, instead of looking at just the overall average scores, you break things out and look at it by race. And believe it or not, our state was the poster child on page 32 in that report as the example. When you only looked at the overall average scores for 8th grade science results in 2009, Kentucky ranked above the national average by a statistically significant amount. But when you broke the scores out and looked at the white students only and compared them state to state, Kentucky's white students scored statistically significantly lower than the national average. A huge change. And we've done a report that's available online. And by the way, all the reports we might mention today, you can go to the Bluegrass Policy blog, which is www.bips.org/blog. If you go there to bips.org/blog, one of the recent entries there will give you access to the web addresses for all of our reports, and you can download anything you want there. And that's our homepage that you brought up. And you'll see on the top there, you go to blog. It's the second item in from the left across the top ribbon. Bingo. And if you just scroll down a little bit, where can you find the Bluegrass Institute Education Report, or that education report? You'll see it's right there. There you go. Just click on that, and it'll bring up a listing that looks like this with the title of the reports and the URL as well. And we'll be talking about some things that are in some of these reports today, and some of those we may hold for the future, but they're all pertinent to education in Kentucky right now. So there we go. So if you take a look, the top one listed here, if you want to just scroll back up since we're on this page, the top report is called While Kentucky Was Sleeping. And in this report, we provide you fair and appropriate comparisons of how Kentucky really ranks compared to other states from the early days of Cura back in 1992, which is generally when most of the first NAEP reporting at the state level began, up to the most recent results currently available, which are for 2019. And if you take a look in the report, for example, I have one large scale. I don't think it's going to be very easy to see this on the screen, but I'll just give you an idea of the kind of thing you'll see in the report. Over here on this side, you can see back in 92, Kentucky highlighted in yellow on my slide and highlighted in light blue on the one that's on page there from figure 2. We were down in the 41st position, 41st. We were at the bottom. We definitely were at the bottom for 4th grade reading for white students. And this is broken out by race. So this is for whites. Flash forward to the present, and you'll see we've risen a little bit. We're now in 33rd position out of the 42 states that had scores reported in both years for white students. But that's all. It's not the middle. The middle is way above there. You can see where the national average is up where there's no number next to it. We're not in the middle. And I don't know if you want to flip through to the black students' 4th grade results. That's going to be number 6, I think, or 5 in the figures. That's still whites.
Yep.
That's still whites one more. Okay, here's black students. You can see back in the early days, back in 1992, that black students actually did score above the national average for black students in 13th place out of the 33 states that had black scores reported in most years. But now take a look what's happened in 2019. This is not a good story.
No.
Well below the middle. In fact, I have a table that actually is not in that report, but is found in a news article that I did for the Northern Kentucky Tribune a couple of weeks back. And it has a table like this, which you don't have, but I just wanted to summarize.
Okay.
Looking at the 4 areas for whites for 4th grade reading and math and 8th grade reading and math, and the 4 areas for black students, 4th grade reading and math and 8th grade reading and math. So that gives us 8 different things we looked at. In 6 out of the 8 categories, Kentucky's performance declined among those states that had scores for both years. In 6 out of 8 cases, our performance declined between 1992 and 2019. Or in the case of 8th grade reading, it's 1998 and 2019 because they didn't give 8th grade reading until that year. And some of the declines, especially for the black students, are really significant. On a percentile basis, we lost 31 percentile points in 4th grade reading for our black students. We were at the 64th place, or 64th percentile, if you want to look at it that way, back in 1998, and we're down at the 33rd now. And it was worse for 4th grade math for blacks. They went from the 94th percentile, almost all the way up to the top back in 1992, to where they're now only at the 42nd. It's a huge loss. So when you hear people tell you, if they dare to do that, that Kentucky used to rank at the bottom, and now it ranks at the middle. It's simply not accurate. The truth of the matter is that we have lots and lots of continuing problems, and other states have made more progress than we have since the National Assessment and the Kentucky Education Reform Act began almost simultaneously in the early 1990s. And
so what do you think contributes to that drop?
There's a number of things that have not happened here that have happened elsewhere. One of those is an explosion of school choice in a couple of states that have done far better than we have over the years in their performance. And the one that comes to mind that we actually did a report focused just on it is the state of Florida. Florida today has massive amounts of school choice for parents. If they're not comfortable with how their child is doing in the public school that they normally would attend because of where they live, they have options, a lot of options. Florida has got charter schools, which are alternative public schools. They're not private schools, but they are alternative and sometimes specialize in certain groups of students and have the ability to exert more control over the teachers and the curriculum than a regular public school does. They also have tuition tax credit scholarships, which allow private corporations to donate to a scholarship granting organization, which is generally a nonprofit. And in turn, then those nonprofits award scholarships so students can afford to attend a private school of their choice. And they also have vouchers, which actually take tax money and provide that tax money to parents so that they can afford to attend a alternate private school choice. We're not going to be able to do vouchers here in Kentucky because of provision in our state constitution until either that constitution is changed or the Supreme Court rules, which many think they may soon, define that provision in our constitution and one similar in others unconstitutional. And in that case, then the vouchers would be legal. But the tuition tax credit scholarships are currently being contested in Kentucky's Supreme Court, and we're expecting a ruling pretty soon on them. But we think that they are constitutional, and they've been found constitutional in other states that have similar constitutions. So that will finally open that up for us to be able to do that. But what happens when you have school choice is you create competition and pressure on the public schools that no law we ever passed has provided, and nothing else that seems to happen in the public sector works as nearly as well. Teachers figured out, gee, we're going to lose students. I might lose my job over this. I need to find out how to do my job better so people will want to keep their kids here. We need to make our public school a great choice too. And that's what we really want at the Bluegrass Institute. We're not trying to destroy public education, far from it. We want to improve it. But we've watched them pass law after law and say, oh, we're going to have standards, and then we get lousy standards that don't work, and nothing has worked. And as you can see, the National Assessment of Education Progress shows that. But Florida has moved from, like we were, down near the bottom back in the early 90s to where they're populating the top part of those graphs I'm talking about.
And that's contributed to the school choice?
I'm sorry?
That's contributed to the school choice option for parents?
I believe school choice has a lot to do with it. Now, it also has to do, of course, with the public education folks saying, we're not going to do things that don't work anymore. We're going to find out what works. We're going to look at the research, and we're going to learn how to find out what research is really valid and what research is, to be honest, in some cases, nothing more than propaganda for somebody's pet fad education idea, because we have to do that. And we are going to find that out, and then we're going to make it happen. And they are doing that. They're doing it in Florida, and they're having some really dramatic results. And it's amazing that you see the public school performance in our report about Florida versus Kentucky. And we only talk about public schools. The public schools have also improved because of choice. It's not just the kids that go to the private school will get a better education. The public schools faced with competition improve as well. A rising tide raises all the boats.
Okay.
And we've had up till present virtually no school choice in the state of Kentucky. We do not have a single charter school in operation at this time. We do not have one tuition tax scholarship awarded at this time, and no vouchers either. We have very limited choice, and until recently, it was sometimes difficult and getting more difficult, even for a student who wanted to transfer from one district to another, to be able to do that. And that law has now just recently been changed as well. But there hasn't been a lot of time. It's just now affecting this school year, and the term just started, so it'll be a while before we see what the impacts are.
So do you see any correlation with these dropping, the test drop to Common Core or Summit program that was rolled out in Kentucky? Any correlation there?
I think there is a relationship. The problem with the Common Core, and I've written about it and I've provided testimony both to our legislature and even the Georgia legislature on this. The problem with the Common Core is there were things that were left out, and it was set up from the beginning as a static, non-living document. One of the things I learned in the Air Force, and they were really hot about this, is real high-quality education standards have to be a living document, because no matter how intelligent the people who create the standards are, they're going to miss things, and also things change over time. And when you have a high-quality system, first, you write the very best standards you can, and those standards have got to be explicit and detailed and written in affirmative terms. The student will be able to add 2 + 2 and get 4 at the end of the program, for example. There's no question about, well, if he gets 5, but he seems to understand the process, we'll give him that credit. The performance is he will add 2 and 2 and get 4. In fact, if you're going to write a standard like that, you might say on a test of math problems for a third grader, out of 20 problems involving addition and subtraction, they will get at least 80% correct. That would be a performance standard as well. And you would tell them what size numbers they would have to be able to add and subtract, say maybe up through 1,000 or up through 100, whatever. That's the way a real standard is written. Once the standard is written, the next step is to write curriculum. And here in Kentucky, until just this July, the curriculum was under the firm control of our school councils. And that was problematic for a number of reasons.
Let me stop you for a second. So you're saying site board council?
Yes.
Okay.
Site-based councils, we call them school-based decision-making councils. School councils is what the legislation usually refers to. And we were putting a huge responsibility on the very lowest level of the education system doing that. The problem with doing that is curriculum is actually extraordinarily time-consuming and challenging to create, and it really benefits from having a lot of expertise brought to the table. When we put it down to the individual school level, especially with the elementary schools, some of which in Kentucky are very small, you don't have a lot of teachers involved. There's not much expertise because there aren't very many people involved. There aren't many eyes on the process. And I think we suffered accordingly. Now, one of the new things that's come out of Senate Bill 1 that just passed is we will be moving, finally, control of curriculum back to the superintendent's hands. But he is charged in that same bill to consult with a lot of people before he makes his final decisions about what the district-wide curriculum is going to look like. And the public's going to have a chance to get involved as well, which was not the case really with school councils, because the school councils were firmly under the control of the teachers. Parents on the councils were always a minority vote and didn't have any control. And the general public, if they didn't have kids in the school, probably knew nothing about what the school councils were doing or what they were involved with. And very rarely did members of the general public get involved, as far as I'm aware.
Well, I've attended those site-based council meetings at the high school and the elementary level, and I've had one-on-ones with the principals asking them, do you guys get to pick the curriculum, or does the district dictate that? And I've always been told the district dictates it, but the schools can choose what platform.
That's actually not the way the law read. It's just the way they allowed the district to have a bully pulpit The law was very explicit, and the law was always enforced whenever a school protested against interference on the part of either the local school board or the superintendent. It was the superintendent and the local school board members who got to go to corrective training, not the school in those cases. The OEA, Office of Education Accountability, was very, very hard about that. So they can say that. And the school at its option could do it that way. But the school always had the choice. The school could choose not to do it that way if they didn't want to. So that's the way it really was set up in the law. But again, the school could go to anybody they wanted to, but in general, they did tend to always do that. But getting back to this process, writing curriculum is really a challenge. And when you write curriculum, I guarantee you're going to have questions of interpretation of the standards, even if they're extraordinarily well written. You need to have an open channel between the curriculum writers and the people who write the standards so that those questions can be resolved. And sometimes what happens when you do that is the standards guys say, oh, we didn't get this right. We need to clarify that. And they change the standard. It's not the curriculum people that are wrong. It's the standards people who didn't get it right. But you didn't have that feedback with Common Core, because as soon as the people who created the Common Core, the work groups as they call them, as soon as they were done with their job, they folded their tents and went home. There was no process available to update the Common Core state standards. They're the same now as they were back in, I think it was 2010 when they were adopted. They're well out of date. And so basing stuff on Common Core was basing stuff on a static, non-growth model that was guaranteed to be a problem over time. And you talk to people in Kentucky today, they all run in fear. None of them will admit that a lot of what we have in math and in reading and so forth is still influenced pretty heavily by the Common Core. They just don't want to admit that, but it is. So a lot of what they have is not as vibrant as it could be because of that. Oh, let me continue, because this little process, after you got the curriculum done, teachers got to teach it in the classroom. Guess what happens when teachers get their hands on curriculum and the standards behind it? They're going to find problems. I guarantee it. Sometimes it's the teacher's lack of knowledge, but sometimes it's a problem either with the curriculum or maybe it's with the standards. You got to have a feedback loop for teachers to interface as well. And Common Core didn't allow for that because the standards folks folded their tents and went home. And finally, you get to the last step in this process, the testing. You got to find out, are students meeting the standards that the standards writers set up? And it's supposed to be set up by the standards writers, which we're not doing properly here in Kentucky. The testers need to be able to look at all of the earlier steps to get an idea of what they really should be testing and what a proficient performance really looks like. We've never done it that way in Kentucky. As soon as the Kentucky Education Reform Act of 1990 started, they started working on a test, and they launched it only 2 years later. And it was a brand new test with elements in it that had never been used in statewide testing before. Things like open response questions as the major form of scoring on the test, performance events, which nobody had ever used before in any state, to my knowledge, writing portfolios, which only 1 or 2 states had used, and so forth. And there was no looking at what was going on in the classroom first to figure out, well, what should that look like and how should it be scored? So the whole process is wrong, and it still is.
Yeah,
and
agreed.
And the standards we have today are so vague, they cannot begin to properly inform curriculum writers, teachers, or testers either. And so you know what you wind up with, you get all of that? The testing folks have to guess on their own what's really allowed and what a proficient performance looks like. And the teachers figure that out pretty quick. And since the teachers are being held accountable for those results, what do you think the teachers start teaching to? The standards or the tests? The tests. They teach to the tests. What's the problem here? Well, the tests have to be kept secret, obviously. So that means the real standards in the state of Kentucky are secret. And that's not the way the process needs to work. So the public really doesn't know, because it's very difficult to get to look at those questions. You have to sign your life away and admit not to tell. But once you've done that, if you find a problem, you can't tell anybody about it. So why bother in the first place? But we don't know. We don't know what's on those tests. But it's the tests that really wind up driving what's going on. It's not supposed to. Teachers aren't supposed to look at them. But if your career and reputation is riding on what comes out of that testing program, what do you think is going to happen?
That's a good point.
So all of this leads to a test-driven curriculum, and it's been that way ever since Cura began.
So to go back and talk about Senate Bill 1, I spoke to Schickel regarding this bill that he had sponsored, and basically it helps parents to not get that runaround. So if you're going to go to site board council and complain about a curriculum, they were saying, oh, well, you got to go complain to the district. And the district would send you back to the site board and say, oh, well, they're in charge of the curriculum. So hopefully this will eliminate a lot of that round and round that parents are getting.
Absolutely. Senate Bill 1 makes some extraordinarily important and badly needed changes. First of all, the local board, because they hire and can fire the superintendent, now has some authority in the process too, even though the specific law reads that it's the superintendent who's got control over the key elements that used to be site-based council prerogatives. And it's curriculum, textbooks, instructional materials, and student support services that have all been returned to superintendent control. But when the superintendent exerts that control now, he's got extra steps he's got to follow. He's got to consult with the school councils involved. He's got to consult with his board of education and the school principal as well. And here's the big new one. There has to be a reasonable review and response period for stakeholders in accordance with policies the local boards are supposed to set up. My understanding right now is that not very many local boards in Northern Kentucky have policies in place, although the Kentucky School Boards Association has provided a model, but the model, I think, needs to grow some more. I have seen the initial products for a couple of our districts that have moved out ahead of the pack, Kenton County and the Fort Thomas Independent District. And they have policies now that they have provided me. They're pretty terse and stripped down, and there's other things I need to see that I haven't seen at this point, but at least they've made a start. But I don't think all the districts in Northern Kentucky have even gone that far, even though Senate Bill 1 went on the books in July as the law of the Commonwealth. And because that happened, the district should have immediately been involved with seeing what they needed to do to fix curriculum for the school session that has now already started. Because they didn't move out on that in some cases. They lost a year in getting curriculum fixes that need to be done. But as you say, now there's a well-established chain of command for the process. You can't get the runaround anymore. The school councils don't have the authority anymore. And if the school district tries to tell you that they do, you need to introduce them to Senate Bill 1 and tell them they need to start complying with the law.
So who did you say could fire the superintendent?
For just cause, the local board can remove the superintendent.
It's the school board.
Yeah, school board, yes, that's one of their functions. He serves at their pleasure, basically. It's not so easy to fire a superintendent. There's a process that has to be followed, but they don't have to renew his contract. They all have contracts. Generally, they run 4 years. That may vary, though. And they can just look for somebody else. They can just non-renew. No
Right.
explanation necessary.
Who would have the final say?
The local board.
So the
So the
school board.
commissioner of education doesn't have final say on the superintendent, whether he's dismissed or contracts are renewed.
Only under certain cases of misfeasance, malfeasance, the state might be able to get involved. But I think, I'm not an expert on that area of the law, but I think the law is fairly restricted. It's the local board that really hires the superintendent. He's their employee. So they have commensurate authority.
So on the superintendent's association, it's AASA.
Yes.
Under they say that they'll train your superintendent for you. And if you go into the training to see what they train them on, of course, this was the case a couple years ago. The first thing they said they trained your superintendent on was how to get the school board to work for you.
And that's been, unfortunately, the way school boards have operated for a long time. And the School Boards Association has kind of given newly elected school board members that you're there to boost public education and support the system. Well, that's not right. They're elected officials. They are there to represent the people who elected them, the people of the Commonwealth of Kentucky, to ensure that the best interests of the people who elected them are followed in the school system. And if the school system is not running well, that board has a responsibility to take action. We all know that has not been happening much in the past. But now, because the board now has authority again, people need to start holding them accountable. And by the way, that's happening right now. We have a lot of contested school board races going on right now that will be resolved in November. And a number of outside of the box candidates, I'll call them, who are very highly motivated, are running in a number of cases. And that's happening right here in Northern Kentucky in a number of our districts. Not all of them, but in a number of them. So people are waking up, and it's a new day. And the local boards need to become aware of who they really serve, because who they really serve can throw them out.
Mhm.
And it may be happening. It's happening in other states. States have been seeing boards getting flipped because of this problem of the board not representing the people, but trying to represent either special interests or the school system itself. And that's not their job. It's not why they're elected.
Right. They're elected to represent us.
Exactly.
Just for the record, I feel like there has been established programs that show that they work, and we're so many decades into this education process that I'm not understanding why we're not looking at paradigms that exist, that work, and using those. Why our KDE insists on building back better education and redoing everything for things that have never even been tested.
That's a great question. And it really kind of segues into the reading thing, because it's a very good example of the problem. And it's the most fundamental example. One of our biggest problems in education here in Kentucky and across the nation is that the public school system is very ineffective in teaching reading properly.